A bold move the Boston Bruins definitely should make this summer is signing Matthew Knies of the Toronto Maple Leafs to an offer sheet.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoke B. Today is Thursday, May 8th, and I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins your first listen of the day. It's available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube, and it's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Monarch Money helps you take control of your finances. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. On today's episode, we are going to discuss the merits of signing Matthew Knies of the Toronto Maple Leafs to an offer sheet, why they would want to do that, what it would take to do that, and whether or not there would be some fallout and if it's worth taking that on to make this kind of bold move. I say 100% yes, go for it, Don Sweeney. Before we get into all that, a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins. You can find me, my hockey thoughts, dad jokes at Ian C. McLaren. I am a lifelong Boston Bruins fan, and I've been covering this team and the NHL as a whole for various outlets for about 20 years now. Everydayers will remember, and if you haven't listened to this episode, please go back and check it out. I recently discussed how the Bruins can kind of carve a path forward by signing Mitch Marner of the Toronto Maple Leafs, who could be an unrestricted free agent this summer. I think he would bring a nice blend of offense and defensive responsibility. And if you watched Game 2 against the Florida Panthers last night, you saw his offensive prowess on full display with the game-winning goal. But there's a different route the Bruins could take as well, and that is targeting restricted free agents. We saw the St. Louis Blues do this very effectively last summer by kind of poaching both Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg from the St. Louis Blues. From the Edmonton Oilers as restricted free agents. This is an option that is available to teams well within their rights to approach restricted free agents, give them an offer sheet, and the player is free to sign. And of course, there are certain conditions, there's compensation. We'll discuss that later on. But why Matthew Knies? This guy, every time, and I've kind of been reluctantly watching the Maple Leafs Panthers series. I watched a bit more of the Leafs Senators series because I was rooting for Ottawa there. But the more I watch the Leafs, the more impressed I am with Matthew Knies. This kid just goes out there and makes things happen. He's a 2021 second-round pick, so still very young. 21 years old, I believe. And he brings such upside in a top 6 wing position. He's big, he's skilled, he plays with an edge, and he is still on the rise as like someone who has not yet reached his ceiling by any means. He's played 161 games for the Leafs over the last 3 seasons. He had 29 goals, 29 assists for 58 points this season, 44 goals, 94 total points in those 161 games. And he will turn 23 in October. Still not yet reached his ceiling. Now, we don't need to, I don't want to do that thing where we look at the 2021 draft and look at the players that were selected after Boston's pick at 21st, which is, of course, Fabian Lysell, a very modest 1 goal, 3 points in 12 games so far. And there are some players drafted below him who have hit on much bigger levels, including Wyatt Johnston, who has taken 2 picks after. Mackie Samoskevich in Florida has impressed. But Knies in that second round spot has been a revelation for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And he is a guy who is up for a new deal, and the Bruins should 100% target him. I talked a lot last season about how the Bruins prioritized Nikita Zadorov and Elias Lindholm in free agency, a defenseman and a center. They have an opportunity coming up to draft a high-end center, and they still lack depth on the wings after losing Jake DeBrusk, Danton Heinen, James Van Riemsdyk from the team 2 seasons ago, and not yet having a guy like Fabian Lysell or Georgi Merkulov emerge as an impact winger at the NHL level. So the Bruins lack talent, especially on the left wing in the prospect pool. Hopefully Lysell can hit on the right. They can add Knies to the left, as well as have Matt Patra, Fraser Minton continue to develop as future centers. Bringing a guy through the draft could be a nice little addition to the pipeline here. They also need cost-controlled, high-ceiling talent, and the Maple Leafs are going to be up against the cap still with Austin Matthews making big money, William Nylander making big money, Mitch Marner up for a new contract. So whether or not they re-up with him, it's going to take probably at least $12 million to re-sign a Mitch Marner. And the further they go in the playoffs and the bigger impact he has, the more likely his price tag will go up. They also have John Tavares, who's coming off the books as an unrestricted free agent. And he's probably a guy who wants to finish his career with the Leafs, especially if they don't get it done this year. There'll be some unfinished business, although they are looking pretty good at this point. So the Leafs, of course, are a high spending club. They will always go to the cap ceiling. But even though the salary cap is going up, they're going to have some big guys to take care of, including Tavares, Marner as UFAs, Knies as an RFA, as well as Nick Robertson. On defense, they're pretty set as well as in net, but those are some big ticket items between Tavares, still at this stage in his career, Marner, and Knies. So who are you going to prioritize? Are you going to prioritize the younger guy and try to get Tavares to take a big cap hit? He's making $11 million right now. Marner almost at $11 million. They have Knies this season at $925,000, which is a huge bonus because he has made a huge impact and has been so clutch so far in the playoffs with some massive goals, 4 goals, 1 assist through 8 playoff games so far for the Leafs. This is a bold swing that the Bruins need to take. Yes, it will cost in terms of salary and compensation, in terms of draft picks. And yes, it could alienate other GMs, and there's the code that you're not supposed to break. But this is a very acceptable route to take. And Matthew Knies is the kind of player that you play this card on because he is the kind of player that the Bruins need. He's the kind of player that the Bruins want to develop. He's the kind of player who is ready to break out in even bigger ways. He's big, he's skilled, he's exactly the kind of player that the Boston Bruins want on their team moving forward. He's still young, not even 23 yet, and it would be well worth the compensation, I believe, to have a guy like Matthew Knies brought into the fold. What would it cost? We will break down the compensation and whether or not the Bruins have the pieces in place to meet those demands here as the podcast continues. If you're a business owner and you realize that you need to hire someone like yesterday, you can find the best candidates fast by using Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed's sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. I'm on the other end of things at the moment looking for my next gig, and Indeed has such great listings, and you can easily apply through their website. But for the business owners, the pressure's on. Every day without the right person is a setback. And that's exactly when Indeed's sponsored jobs come in handy. They make sure your post is seen by the right candidate right now. Speed up the hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now. Support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. But if you're hiring, Indeed is all you need. Thank you so much once again for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine. Everydayers, I appreciate you so much. They get each new episode uploaded to their feeds on their favorite podcast app and on YouTube by hitting subscribe and hitting the notification button on YouTube as well. Please join our everydayers and keep up with all things Spoke to Be every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today, we're discussing the Bruins and a potential offer sheet for Matthew Knies. As a refresher, an offer sheet is a contract offered to restricted free agents by a team other than the player's current team. If the player signs the offer sheet, their original team has the right to match the terms or receive compensation in the form of draft picks if they choose not to match. Matthew Knies fits into this category. He is the kind of player that the Bruins desperately need and covet. Skilled, big, physical, clutch, and at an age where he could easily come into the team and make an immediate impact for years to come. Again, the Leafs would have an opportunity to match. There's 7 days after an offer sheet is signed where they can make that decision. Of course, it takes two to tango here. The player would need to be willing to sign and accept the fact that even if they want to stay with their current team, there's an opportunity there for them to not match, and they would go to this other team. Matthew Knies, I believe, is the kind of player who likely would want to stay with the Leafs because of how close they are and how devoted they are to winning as a group. But the opportunity is there for an offer sheet to be signed, and especially if they're up against the cap, then it might be difficult for them to match. Now, the higher the average annual valuation of the offer sheet is, then the less likely it is that the team will match, but also the compensation goes way up. Like, we can start at the bottom of things, and this is all via Puckpedia. And I can share the screen here so that you guys can take a look as well if you're watching on YouTube. But it's very unlikely that teams will come in at an offer sheet of the lowest value, which would be below 1.511701. There's no compensation for that, but obviously that would be matched quite easily. Even 1.5 to 2.3, that's going to be matched. 2.9 to 4.58, that would cost a second round pick, which the Bruins have in 2026. But if it's in that range, the Maple Leafs would happily match. Here's where we start to get into the big numbers and what it will cost to sign Matthew Knies to an offer sheet and not have the Leafs be able to match. So if we look at it, it's about $4.58 million to $6.871 million. The cost is a 2026 first round pick and a 2026 third round pick. The thing with the Bruins is, of course, in recent years, they haven't really been able to consider offer sheets because they didn't have the picks, whether they had traded their current first round pick or they had traded futures. For the Bruins, they actually have 2 picks in the first round of the 2026 NHL entry draft. And that is as a result of trade with Toronto that sent Brandon Carlo to the Leafs for Fraser Minton. So it would kind of be funny if the Bruins were to sacrifice their 2026 first round pick because for Matthew Knies specifically, because they already have Toronto's first round pick. And hopefully the Bruins are good enough next year that the 2 picks are closer in range than they are right now. The Bruins choosing 7th, the Leafs slot yet to be determined, but it could be as high as 32 if they are to win the Stanley Cup. So the Bruins could use that first round pick in an offer sheet, their own first round pick, and then still have a first on the books because of that trade with Toronto, which, I mean, all due respect to Brandon Carlo, that is still a very good trade for the Boston Bruins. Now, 4.58 to 6.871, likely that Toronto would match, which takes us to the next level, which would be between 6.871 million and 9.16 million. That would cost that 2026 first round pick, which we already talked about, a 2026 second round pick, and a 2026 third round pick. Now, the Bruins do have, in 2026, they have 2 firsts, a second, and a third. So they could pull that off for sure. And that is something that, still very much on the table. You can see here that as the values go up, the fewer teams are in it, as well as the amount of picks required. Would the Leafs match between 6.87 and 9.16? For a player like Matthew Knies, and depending on whether they're willing to part ways with a Marner or a Tavares, or they can't get Tavares to bring his ask down, it's very possible that they would not match, but also kind of likely that they would because he is such an impact player for this team. In order to pull this off, they might have to go in the 9.16 to 11.452 range, which would cost 2 first round picks in the next 3 drafts. So starting in 2026, 2 first round picks in the next 3 drafts from 2026, 2027, 2028, 2026 second round pick, and a 2026 third round pick. Now, don't forget the Bruins have this conditional pick with the Florida Panthers that could turn into a first round pick if Florida is able to come back from their 0-2 hole against Toronto and win their second round series. If Florida moves on, then it becomes a first round pick. So similar to the deal with the Leafs, they would be able to cough up their own first round pick, the Bruins, and still have another first from the Panthers. Even if it's not a first, it would still be a second. So giving up that pick wouldn't be as difficult. The Bruins have more in the way of draft pick assets than they have in a long time. They have 2 seconds this year to go along with their first. They have 2 firsts in 2026 and a second and a third. They have the first and 2 seconds in 2027, and that second could turn into a first if they do move on, the Florida Panthers. Would they be willing to give that up for Knies? 1 first, a second, and a third is one thing. 2 firsts, a second and a third, plus committing to between 9 and 11.4 million. It's a big ask, but you're banking on Matthew Knies maybe hitting a next level and becoming a 30, perhaps 40 goal scorer as a feature player on a team with full power play responsibilities, killing penalties. That's the kind of guy that the Bruins desperately need. Now, above 11.452 million would be 4 first round picks. That's probably a bit too rich. Ideally, you'd want to go somewhere in this range, a first, second, or third in 2026, or a 2 firsts over the next 3 drafts, plus a second and a third. It's very possible the Leafs would match it. Even if that were to be the case, you'd still be forcing them to pay Matthew Knies perhaps higher than they want. And maybe they've already committed big money to Tavares and Marner as unrestricted free agents on July 1st. Don't yet have Knies taken care of, and that's when a team can swoop in and do some damage here on the restricted free agent market. And that's my contention, that the Bruins should take this route and try to grab a guy like Matthew Knies, because he's making an impact night in and night out for the Toronto Maple Leafs here in these Stanley Cup playoffs. And a big reason why they're only 2 wins away from the Eastern Conference Finals. Now, what would be the implications of this? Would there be potential fallout? Yes. And we'll discuss what that could be here as the podcast continues. Have you checked your bank account lately and wondered, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, streaming services, it's very easy to lose track. And that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. Track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. What would the implications be of targeting Matthew Knies as a restricted free agent? Well, despite the fact we saw 2 offer sheets last summer that were successful, they're kind of rare. There's this GM etiquette, unspoken code, and a potential retaliation as well. We saw that a few years ago with Jesperi Kotkaniemi and Sebastian Aho, the Montreal Canadiens, and the Carolina Hurricanes, where the Canadiens signed Aho to an offer sheet. It was matched, and then a year later, Carolina signed Kotkaniemi, and he was not matched. There's GM etiquette as well, this code. You don't want to ruffle feathers. You don't want to burn bridges. You don't want to, offend your GM brethren, although we saw that again with Edmonton and St. Louis last summer. And we'll see if there's any counter moves coming up this summer from an Edmonton side of things. But it worked out for the St. Louis Blues for sure. Broberg and Holloway were big parts of that team. Fan reaction from both sides. The Bruins would love the swagger. Leafs fans would likely melt down, and it could reignite the rivalry in a really big way. There's also the hurdle of front office boldness. Does Don Sweeney actually have the gumption to pull the trigger on this? It would take boldness. It would take a risk of failure. It would take a willingness to sacrifice some of your future to add a guy who is genuinely on the verge of stardom right now, who's already been developed. You don't have to wait for him. There's a lot at stake here, but the Bruins have said they need to make some bold moves. They need to evolve offensively. They need to reinvigorate team offense. And for them to turn things around after this embarrassing season where they did not make the playoffs, Don Sweeney spent big last summer and it did not pay off at all. There was that everydayers will remember when I talked about the end of the season presser. There was a lot of defensiveness and sensitivity among Don Sweeney and team president Cam Neely for the way things went wrong. They don't want to have egg on their face and be a laughingstock of the league. They want to be a team that is seen as a force to be reckoned with, both on and off the ice. And you talk about the big bad Bruins, those two typify that kind of old school mentality, and they can strut their stuff by making a meaningful impact on the current on ice product by playing this card. If you can steal a top 6 winger from your biggest rival and they can't match it, why not? It's a win-win for the Boston Bruins. They get the player, Toronto's depleted, reignites the rivalry, and you have a clutch player who could help you to make it back to the playoffs and to succeed once you get there next summer. All right, so to recap, the Bruins should target Matthew Knies, a big, skilled winger with top 6 upside. He plays with an edge, fits the Bruins culture, fits a big need for the Bruins, scoring wingers as well. It would be costly in terms of cap hits and giving up future draft picks, but the Bruins are not reluctant to do that, as we've seen. Why waste draft picks on a rental at the trade deadline when you can invest them in someone who could help you for years to come? Would you offer Matthew Knies an offer sheet? What's the highest AAV that you would go? Let me know in the YouTube comments or on social media at Locked NHL Bruins. I would love to continue this conversation over on social. Is it worth the draft pick compensation? Is he worth the cap hit that would require big time compensation? I think so. And the Bruins have a real opportunity here to dent the Maple Leafs and perhaps take the shine off what could be a nice spring for them, and also greatly improve their team. Fraser Minten, Matthew Knies could be reunited. The Bruins could still benefit from that first round pick from the Leafs next year while giving up their own. And hopefully they'd be much improved, so it's not as high of a pick as they're getting this year, which is 7th overall. That's it for today's podcast, my friends. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. Thank you for making Locked On Bruins your first listen today. For your second listen, be sure to check out Locked On NHL Game Night. Every game, every night, until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find NHL Game Night on Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Please have a great Thursday. I've got my first 3-pitch game tonight. Season's back on. Definitely excited about that. Please do take care of yourselves, friends. Take care of each other. And we'll talk to you here on the next episode of Locked On Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.